everybody. I'm so pleased to see such a big room full of people. So good afternoon and welcome to the library's program, Stories from the Daggitt Cemetery. If you've never explored this historic pocket on the Glencoe Highland Park border, this blustery spring day is not a good day for it, but it's perfect. It's perfect for enjoying it from afar. Two things I wanted to, the presenters are all members of the research staff from the Glencoe Historical Society. Here they are. John Mandel will get us started, followed by Ed Ollinger and Peggy Hamill, who you may remember. She was at the library a lot. John, take it away.
So welcome everybody. Thank you, Grace. Great to be here today. As Grace said, I'm John Mandel. I'm a research staffer at the Glencoe Historical Society. I grew up in Glencoe and actually spent many days and evenings in the library back a long time ago when I was in high school and college. So it's great to see kind of how it looks today. Great transformation. So Glencoe Historical Society, we also call it GHS, is an all-volunteer, award-winning, and nonprofit organization that's dedicated to collecting, preserving, and promoting Glencoe's history. Today, as you heard, we're going to talk about the Daggitt Cemetery. It's that small graveyard you've passed a million times along Lake Cook Road. It's adjacent to the Braeside train station. Many people, unfortunately, have never had time to check it out, so we do encourage you to visit. So today, we're going to tell you some interesting stories that we have unearthed, pardon the pun, in the cemetery. I'm going to begin with an introduction. Then Ed Ollinger will talk about the Daggitt family, specifically Robert Daggitt, who the cemetery is named after. And then Peggy Hamill will explain the use of cemetery gravestone symbols that were chosen by those who bury their dead at the cemetery. So please hold all your questions until the end of our presentation. We'll have lots of time to answer any questions you may have. So thanks again for coming. Now sit back and enjoy the stories and a look back at some interesting local history. So it is said that dead men tell no tales, but you may be surprised to discover that cemeteries and gravestones actually do tell tales. We can learn a lot from cemeteries, including information about people and their occupations, demographics, what a person's religion was, where people came from, immigration, their ethnicity, and their family. Details about events, diseases, epidemics, and age spans. In our presentation today, we'll highlight a number of early Glencoe and Highland Park families and their internment or burial. We're also going to discuss general immigrant groups, especially the English and Germans who came and settled in Glencoe and Highland Park, going back as far as the 1840s. In addition, we're going to talk about what their graves say about them. So from the earliest times, people buried, burned, or otherwise disposed of the dead. The Egyptians, for instance, built pyramids that we're well acquainted with to bury their dead, and we're familiar with those structures. But did you know that the Egyptians were also the first to place flowers on graves? Or that in the earliest pyramids, we see funerary furniture such as tables and chairs? The early Chinese buried their emperors with hundreds of ceramic warriors to help them fight wars in the next world. The Greeks, on the other hand, used acanthus leaves and flowers on Greek temples that were built to honor the dead as a reminder of the prickly journey of life to the eternal life. Buddhists in India placed their dead on funeral pyres, which were then burned. And ceremonies for the dead are well known, including funerals, wakes, days of the dead, and All Saints' Days. A cemetery is a place to bury the dead, providing a resting place with respect and give descendants a place to keep in touch. There are several different kinds of cemeteries. Going back in history, during the colonial era, ceremonies to bury congregation members of East Coast churches were often held next to local churches. And in the Midwest, community cemeteries existed for the entire town, township cemeteries, and are what are now called pioneer cemeteries. At the beginning of the 19th century, church graveyards had a really bad reputation of gloom and doom, plus they were overflowing with bodies. Kind of reminds me of some of the tales I've heard about New Orleans. There were many stories of body snatching gambling, and prostitution occurring in graveyards. But at the same time, attitudes toward death were changing and becoming more positive. That led to the development of 19th century Victorian cemeteries such as Chicago's famous Rose Hill, Graceland, and Oakwood cemeteries, all places that were park-like locations where you could spend the day with your ancestors. Interestingly, Daggitt is older than all of these well-known Chicago cemeteries. Pioneer cemeteries fall in between these two categories. Daggitt is actually considered a pioneer cemetery for Protestants because the people who are buried there are primarily German Lutheran and English Methodist churchgoers. On the other hand, Catholics are buried in cemeteries affiliated with their churches, often in churchyard cemeteries. Locally, some of those are in Evanston and Northbrook. And in the U.S., a pioneer cemetery is a place as a burial ground for pioneers or the first white settlers in an area. Now, these American pioneers founded their cemeteries during the territorial expansion of the U.S. as we moved west toward California in the 1800s. Their founding dates span from the late 18th century to the early 20th century. And Daggitt is like many other pioneer cemeteries in that it's part of a homestead. In this case, it's the homestead of Robert Daggitt. Daggitt has also been called a community cemetery, meaning that people from the community are buried there. By comparison, a national cemetery may be located far from the place, from the homes in our community of those who are buried there, such as soldiers and sailors. A community cemetery also does not contain the graves of people from just one church or religious denomination. Daggitt, on the other hand, is both a pioneer and community cemetery that is home to the final resting places for Glencoe's and Highland Park's earliest settlers, with dates beginning in the 1840s. Burials there have continued through the 20th and 21st century, and Daggitt is a cemetery that does not have mausoleums or large grave markers. Mausoleums actually began being constructed in the late 19th century in the Midwest. Because Daggitt is located in the countryside, little stone was available during pre-industrialized times to create mausoleums or add large grave markers there. We're going to talk a little bit about the location and history of Daggitt now. As you probably are aware from a previous mention, Daggitt is situated just inside the southern border of Lake County, although Robert Daggitt's property spanned both Glencoe and Lake County, Glencoe and Highland Park, which are separate counties, Glencoe being in Cook and Highland Park in Lake County. That's why Glencoe considers Daggitt a pioneer settler of Glencoe, but Highland Park also considers him an early settler of the town, if not the earliest settler. Kind of on a related nature, Daggitt has had different names over the years. It's currently spelled D-A-G-G-I-T-T, but over the years it often was spelled D-A-G-G-E-T-T with the E replacing the I. The name Grace Cemetery was added in 1862, and we think that's probably in conjunction to the relationship with Grace Lutheran Church. And the cemetery has also been called Braeside Cemetery, obviously because of the name of the railroad station in Highland Park that's adjacent to the property. So the last legal cemetery transactions there occurred in 1910, but there were burials there until more recently. In 1996, through a cooperative legal and cleanup effort by the city of Highland Park and the Park District of Highland Park, the cemetery became the responsibility of Moraine Township, which is formerly called Deerfield Township. A formal ceremony for the rededication was held on September 21st, 1996. And Daggitt is today owned by Moraine Township, which includes all of Highwood, most of Highland Park, and parts of Deerfield and Lake Forest. So we're going to talk a little bit about the geography and some what I call fast facts about the cemetery. It's currently situated on a half an acre of land, although many, many decades ago the tract was more like an acre in size. The cemetery was also formed in 1845, not 1843 as the sign says. Not sure why that is there, but It is. First burial was in 1845, and that was Robert Daggitt's daughter, Ann Daggitt, who died 16 years before the start of the Civil War. So that is the very first burial there. When the railroad came through the North Shore, Robert Daggitt could have had the tracks laid through his property, the cemetery, the orchard that stood there, but he elected to give up his cabin rather than run the cemetery through the property. And Ed's going to talk a little bit about where that stands later. The Daggitts, a few years later, donated the cemetery to Grace Lutheran Church in Highland Park, probably in 1862, when the name changed to Grace Cemetery. Several decades later, in 1896, the state of Illinois passed a law requiring some townships to assume responsibilities for cemeteries that were abandoned. The last burial at the cemetery was in 1984, so more recently, when a longtime Glencoe resident and descendant of the family named Rose Dennis Booth was buried there. Unfortunately, there was no marker placed on her grave, and we don't know exactly where her burial site is on the property. So I actually counted up the number of graves that are listed in these binders, and it's about 171 graves. So it's not a huge cemetery, but certainly has a lot of influence and impact in the history of both towns. And Daggitt is now closed to new burials. So you see, here's the cemetery layout on the left. So that's an overhead shot of the layout. This is Lake Hook Road here. This is St. John's Avenue here with the Braeside train station parking lot about there and the train station there. And this drawing here is looking from a northern perspective. The Daggitt plot is in the northwest corner of the property. It's a very pretty site with lots of trees and bushes. So again, if you get a chance to go there, it's interesting bit of history. We are going to offer a formal tour in the fall. You'll hear more about that later. So now I want to talk a little bit about the cemetery restoration project. Obviously, because Daggitt's so old, over the decades it fell into some disrepair. Fortunately, in 2020, Moraine Township undertook a 3-year restoration project at the cemetery that repaired and restored the historic stones, which is really why we're able to see so much information today on the markers. You can see an example of this project in the left with work underway. There's also a variety of photos in the binder you can take a look at. It's really cool to see that going on. The center photo and the left and the right photo, oops, sorry about that, show before and after effects. So that was actually on the other slide, but you can see the restoration work really uncovered a lot of the details. So following decades of neglect and vandalism, Hollywood nights of mischief and fun, theft of marble markers for surprisingly baking use, and nature's destruction of inscriptions on soft stones made tracing many of the names in the family histories difficult, if not impossible. So gravestones that were previously tilted, broken, or filthy are now clean, upright, and stand in rows, thanks to those efforts. Cleaned marble and limestone appears to be new. And epoxy was used to repair and really replace parts of some broken markers, while water pressure was used to clean and improve the surfaces of the stones. Some missing and damaged marker base stones were also restored. And previously illegible inscriptions were able to be read for the first time in decades and help tell stories about our community's history. So several gravestones that were uncovered as part of this effort revealed the names of people who did not appear on surveys that were taken on the property in 1959 and 1986. Unfortunately, we don't know who they are or why they're buried at Daggitt. So as I said, this is a set of before and after images, quite remarkable. There we go. Here's another photo showing a severely damaged gravestone and the remarkable work that was done to restore it. Give you a second to take a look. I mean, that's just amazing work. So thanks, and I'd now like to turn it over to Ed Ollinger, who's going to talk about Robert Daggitt, his family, and his descendants.
Okay. Now, Robert Daggitt was born in England in 1793 and died in the United States in 1871. He was both a farmer and cabinet maker. He married his first wife, Martha, in 1817, and they had 9 children. Now, among contemporary North Shore standards, that seems like a lot of kids. But as you remember from school, in the 16th through the 19th century, farmers needed large families to ensure that there were enough kids living into adulthood to help manage the farm and take care of the other businesses. Now, unfortunately, Martha died in 1833, and Daggitt married his second wife, Elizabeth, in England in 1834, and they had 1 child together. Now, the Daggitt family sailed to the U.S. from Yorkshire, England, in 1834, or possibly 1839. The ship logs are unclear as to when this occurred. He is listed among the earliest settlers in Deerfield Township, now called Moraine Township. And as you heard from John earlier, that the earliest settlers were English Methodists or German Lutherans. Now, in 1843, Daggitt purchased a 160-acre homestead east of Ravinia at a cost of $1.24 per acre. On the map on the left, one sees what's called a land patent, which is the official document put out by the state of Illinois transferring the 160 acres to Robert Daggitt in 1843. And on the right, one can see the location of this property down in the lower part of Lake County, Illinois in 1922, located around in here. Now, in 1833, a Mr. Cobley Benton, who was a visitor to this area, which was ultimately purchased by Robert Daggitt, wrote in his diary, and I quote, "This is a rich land, heavily timbered on the east near Lake Michigan. Okay. A large open prairie to the west. As far as the eye can see, with the marshland, which we now refer to as the Skokie Lagoons, some almost impassable in between," end quote. Now, to give perspective, Chicago in the early 1930s had a population between 200 and 300 persons. There were 33 businesses, including 7 shops and 6 hotels, none as nice as the Peninsula or the Four Seasons, I guarantee you. Now, the first bank in Chicago was established in 1835. Now, I would surmise with a great degree of certainty that any Chicago Bears roaming around the city at that time did not contemplate moving to Indiana. Now, over the ensuing years, Daggitt's holdings increased between 1,000 and 3,000 acres. Depending on one's reference source, it's unclear. Now, this is what it looked like in 1871. In 1861, 817 acres. This is the original 160-acre homestead in dark red. And the remaining properties that he purchased are the light-colored red. And it's interesting to note that the properties are not contiguous at this time. And I don't know if the reason why, but I suspect that properties came up for sale at different times during his career as a farmer. Now, most of the land now is now encompassed by the Chicago Botanic Gardens, the Ravinia Park, which it was said that this is where Robert Daggitt grazed his sheep, and also the Glencoe Lakeshore Country Club. Now, Daggitt buried his second wife, Elizabeth, in the cemetery when she died in 1867. In addition, unfortunately, he had to bury 4 of his children on the property, including Anne, age 13, who died in 1845 from tuberculosis, Rachel, age 21, who died in 1847 also from tuberculosis, James, 18, who died in 1848 after being injured by a falling tree, and Elizabeth, age 24, who died from unknown causes in 1860. And this is the central marker in the Daggitt Cemetery, locating the family plot around which Robert Daggitt buried his immediate family. Now, in 1871, the year Daggitt died, he had earlier just married his third wife, Matilda. Okay. Now, Daggitt allowed his neighbors to use the dedicated half-acre plot as a burial ground. He purchased a state charter and charged $1 per grave. Now, during the 1850 cholera epidemic, however, he did freely give grave sites to his neighbors, who were primarily German Lutherans, who later founded the Grace Lutheran Church, which was located at that time on Lake Cook Road. Now, in 1862, Daggitt and his second wife, Elizabeth, legally transferred the family burial ground to his son, Robert, and also to a Mr. John Fedd. And specific lot numbers were reserved for family burial ground. And you could see in this diagram, the central marker locating Daggitt's immediate family, and also other plots which were taken by other members for future burial. Now, in 1862, Daggitt and his second wife, Elizabeth, legally transferred the family burial ground to his son, Robert, and Mr. John Feld. And and in 1871, the family donated the cemetery to the Grace Lutheran Church in Highland Park, and the cemetery became known as the Grace Cemetery. The Grace Cemetery was platted and registered in 1887. Now, sometime in the 20th century, the cemetery was renamed the Daggitt Cemetery. Now, this last slide of mine indicates the Daggitt family tree, which has been put together. The colored in rectangles indicate those members of the family who were buried in the Daggitt Cemetery itself. And the red rectangles indicate the first generation Daggitts, Robert and Elizabeth. The purple indicates the second generation of Daggitts buried there. The third generation is in yellow, okay, the fourth in blue. The green rectangles indicate the spouse-in-laws who were buried at the cemetery. Now, Peggy Hamill will now talk about how the Daggitt Cemetery reflects the culture of those buried there and the symbolism in the grave sites and the tombstones. Thank you.
We've been talking about immigration, or the number of Germans and English people who lived in the area. So we thought we'd give you just a little chart showing this area here in the beginning. The immigration into Glencoe in the 19th century reflected national patterns. People from the United Kingdom began arriving in the 1840s, attracted by fertile farmland, as well as the growing city of Chicago. Immigration from England was the result of many practices, but a primary reason was the consolidation of farms, which pushed out small and tenant farmers. At the higher end of the socioeconomic ladder, the practice of primogeniture encouraged many younger sons who could not inherit family estates to look for land in the U.S. Around the same time, German migration also began to rise. So you can't read those dates, but that's the 1840s right there. Interestingly, a major reason was the opposite of primogeniture, which passes the entire estate to the first son. In Germany, firms can be inherited by all descendants, which could end up dividing the land into too many small parcels to be productive and profitable. Overpopulation, bad weather, and the attraction of industrialized cities were other important reasons for migrating. In 1847, a community of German immigrants settled along Cook County Line Road with Lake Cook. They established the Trinity Lutheran Church in 1866, one of the oldest Lutheran churches in the Cook County. That frame church was built on Green Bay and County Line roads. Subsequently, as families began to spread out, a new Trinity Lutheran Church was built on Hawthorne Avenue in Glencoe, opposite Glencoe Central School. After decades of declining membership, the church was closed, and in 2007, the building was demolished. However, Trinity Lutheran Church spawned two other local Lutheran churches, Grace Lutheran in Northbrook and Zion Lutheran in Highland Park. Most of the founders of Trinity Lutheran Church are buried in Daggitt Cemetery. Since you're attending this program, I assume some of you have on occasion visited, walked around cemeteries. When visiting cemeteries, it is interesting to note the wide variety of tombstones, which are a great way to learn about the culture in an area. Many of the German tombstones located in the southwest section of Daggitt Cemetery have inscriptions written in the German language. The words geboren, meaning birth, and gestorben, they're abbreviated here, appear next to birth and death dates. Vater und Mutter are used on several graves to denote father and mother. Some of the oldest pioneer families are German names such as Beck, Schneider, Fade, and Beinlich. Graves can also be quite artistic in their design. To focus a visitor's thinking about the deceased, some grave markers have epitaphs or quotations. Others present artistic symbols to reflect the contemporary perspective on life and death. In the 17th and 18th centuries, tombstones often had emblems of impending death, such as skulls, skeletons, and hourglasses, measuring the span of life. Even more gruesome were coffin bells that were sometimes left in the coffin so that a person who had been buried alive could awaken and ring for help. Mary Todd Lincoln had such a bell in her casket. As we move into the time of Daggitt Cemetery, those harsh symbols were being replaced with more positive images. Mourning was represented by draped urns and clasped hands and floral arrangements. Visual symbols of resurrection and everlasting life were cherubs, upward pointing fingers, and heavenly gates. Children's markers often illustrated innocence with images of lambs, doves, or broken roses. Also frequently represented are plants and flowers, which remind us of the beauty and brevity of life. Calla lilies represent beauty and marriage. Poppies indicate sleep and death. A broken rose shows life cut too short. That's a flower. And vines illustrate the connection between God and man. Symbols frequently used are hands to represent the hand of God pointing up to heaven, or clasped right here to represent matrimony. Open books are a symbol of the book of life or the Bible. A torch, usually inverted, indicates the soul is still burning in the afterlife. Trees, stumps, and limbs or logs show that death is cut too short. This symbol was so popular by the turn of the 20th century that gravestones with these images could be ordered from the Sears and Roebuck catalog. Urns are one of the most common symbols. It's used to equate the veil between earth and heaven. Here with drapes. Drapery represented a protective shroud for the soul and became a symbol of the dead. Although urns are now used for ashes, cremation was very rare in the 19th century. We hope that you agree with us that the Daggitt Cemetery is a community landmark that tells interesting and important stories about the settlements in this area. If you'd like to learn more about Daggitt Cemetery and visit the site, GHS will offer a tour on Sunday, October 4th at 2 p.m. Watch for more details on our website at glencoehistory.org. We will also be highlighting new information, including details about Union soldiers buried in the cemetery. We want to thank the library for partnering with us today and the GHS research volunteers who work diligently to learn the history of Daggitt Cemetery and contribute to our other award-winning programs. We also wish to acknowledge Cindy Wolfson and Moraine Township, who loaned us the 2 binders, which I think are over there, with photos of the cemetery restoration project. We invite you to check those out. Also on your seats, there's a list of GHS programs and events that will be coming up, and I'll just mention the next big one. Saturday, April 25th, GHS will be hosting, I think, our 3rd Hollywood and Glencoe Trivia Night. You can visit our website at glencoehistory.org to purchase tickets. So, how about some questions? Thank you. We're really glad that you came today. I wasn't so sure how many people would venture out. Hi.
How many descendants still are in Glencoe from some of the names?
Well, we know their Beinlich's still around, right? I don't think we have information about that. Holfelder. Well, you can recognize some of those streets too, whether family is still around.
When I was on the path one day and I saw the sign of the cemetery and I was like, oh, and then you start recognizing.
Right.
So I was just curious if you were able to get any history of descendants.
Well, the last woman who was buried was a dentist. The dentists were among the first English immigrants to the area. And I counted when we were seeing the marker for the cemetery, there were 16 family names listed and 12 of them were German. So that's why we talked about Trinity Lutheran Church as being really important.
Is the cemetery open for visiting?
The cemetery is open. If you drive by, you could park in the train parking lot very easily and just wander around yourself. We did a tour in October or so last fall, and we had about, 18 people maybe, including families that brought their kids, and we had a really good time. We talked about some of this, and we'll be doing it again in October. Just check our website, but it will be October 4th at 2 p.m. Yeah.
In what year was the cleanup of the headstones done? I didn't.
John can
I
answer
think it
that.
started 2020 and lasted three years, so 2023.
It really is remarkable. I think you said it was $50,000 for the project, which seems kind of inexpensive for what we saw they did. I mean, they really put the markers back together as well as
It was
cleaning
in
them.
rough shape before.
It was not so attractive. Hi.
You
Chris.
may have mentioned it, but I missed it. How many grave sites are there now?
171, I think, if you include the last burial, based on my count of the book. I have not seen that number anywhere else, so it's something that we just kind of added up. But I think that's probably an accurate number.
And did you notice any evidence of infant or maternal mortality?
We didn't see where you often see like typhoid ran through a community and you just see all of these kids under the age of 2 and yeah. No, but there are a lot of little ones in there. Mm-hmm.
The books do have the birth and death days of people, so if you want to check that out. Yeah, there are a lot of younger people. It's just because I think Ed said people didn't live as long back then, so families were larger.
Any other questions? Yes, Judy.
What other contagious diseases besides tuberculosis and
Diphtheria was a big killer, but we don't have that information. No, no, they don't mark, they don't say what people died from, just born and died dates.
were there obituaries in newspapers at that time?
The Tribune, I don't know whether they would have included Glencoe at that time, but the archives of the Tribune go back into the 19th century.
You probably said, but what, Daggitt seemed to have a lot of money. What was his profession?
He was a farmer.
Farmer.
Yeah.
Chad, a farmer?
Well, I don't know what land cost then.
Well, it was $1.24 an acre.
Yeah,
But I
right,
suspect,
relative
I
to,
suspect that at that time was a fair amount of
oh,
money.
sure, everything has to be,
I mean, he bought a lot of land.
well, and there was just a lot of land open around here. I mean, Glencoe was a farming community. That this land that we're on was Johnson's farm.
Where was his house located?
Where's Johnson's house located?
Daggitt's.
Daggitt's house.
It was located at the Braeside train station, it's not.
It's a nice memorial. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure you answered her question. I think, if I'm paraphrasing it correctly, are there any descendants living in Glencoe now of those original families?
We did not have that information. We haven't surveyed anybody. I just know from the names that I see still around that they are directly related. But we don't have that information, no.
I guess we were expected the living descendants to attend a lecture today.
Yeah, yeah. All of you who are related, stand up. Yeah.
Your family tree of the Daggitt,
Mhm.
there was, I noticed the bottom, I did, somebody who was born in 1948, could conceivably still be alive.
I was.
But yeah, no, but a Daggitt.
Yes.
But a Daggitt, there was somebody.
Yeah.
at the bottom
Did you notice?
So,
Yeah.
thank you.
had
Yeah, but we don't hear the name Daggitt now. Or Dietrich, that was another English farming name. Bobby?
Church in this area.
In Northbrook, with Grace and Zion in Highland Park.
Buried in the cemetery.
It's closed now. I don't know what would be involved in asking to open for interment, but did you say the state says that townships took over
Yeah.
neglected or abandoned cemeteries? So that's how it ended up at Moraine Township. Good question. I mean, it's not full. So, I mean, there's not headstones everywhere you go.
Do you have any idea how it is that Daggitt wound up here? Were people recruited who arrived in New York City or anything about that?
We don't have information about recruiting at that period. When the later, toward the end of the 19th century and into the 20th century, we know that land developers bought large parcels and recruited from the city. Yeah, but at this time, I don't know how people found their way. But Chicago was growing. Eddie mentioned how small it was in 1830, but it was rapidly growing at that time. And it was a place that people could easily get to and then see all the farmland in Illinois.
By about 1845, there were about 40,000 residents in Chicago, starting out with about 200 to 300 in the
Yeah,
1830s.
Yeah, another question?
Are there any photos or renderings, drawings of Daggitt's home?
Not that we have. Mm-mm. And we do check with Highland Park about stuff like this because they have, even though they've closed their their building, they have their collection at the Highland Park Library. So there's still a lot of information can be easily gained from them. Anything else? We really appreciate your coming out on a day like this.